researcher Bryce Johnson has received a strange photograph of a human-like hand with claws.
He goes on to say, I threw it back into the woods, but it wasn't until then that I realized what I may have had in my possession.
Bryce Johnson had seen a lot in his time researching strange phenomena, but this was different. The photograph in his hands was unsettling, a human-like hand, covered in coarse hair, but with something unnatural at its fingertips. Sharp, curved claws extended from where fingernails should have been. The image wasn't blurry or vague like so many pieces of supposed evidence in the Bigfoot world. It was clear enough to make out the finest details: the striations in the skin, the coarse hair trailing along the knuckles, and the tapering darkness of the curved talons. Those details didn't match what Bryce had expected. In years of hearing sightings and accounts, claws had never been part of the picture. Reports described large hands, yes, hairy, thick, and powerful, but always with nails, not talons. At first, he pulled back, staring at the odd picture in his hands. Without thinking, he set it aside, almost like it might somehow hurt him. The reaction felt silly, but real. That quick rejection stayed with him even after the photo was out of sight. He paced slowly, running his hands through his hair in quiet frustration. Something about that hand stayed in his mind. It was part surprise, part familiarity. If it really was what it seemed, it could be one of the rarest finds of his entire long career. This wasn't the kind of thing to keep quiet. His pulse finally stilled enough to strike a chord on his phone.
I've never heard any cases or people describing Bigfoot with claws, but I mean, that certainly looks like a human hairy hand.
Within minutes, the image was in circulation among his team. The initial responses were immediate: disbelief, fascination, and a whole lot of concern. Bryce looked at the photograph once again to study it. His first thought after was to call up his team, who were in the middle of an expedition already. On the other side of the call was Dr. Maria Mayer, a primatologist and an expert at that. Bryce sent her the picture, asking for her professional opinion, because there was no one else he could trust with this discovery. The moment she received the picture, her expression said it all. It was exciting, yet shocking. And that's when she knew she had to get to the bottom of this, so she started dissecting the picture. There was something in the proportions that felt eerily familiar. The basic shape of a human hand remained, a twisted semblance of flesh, bone, and sinew. But the claws? They were unmistakable. Long, curved, tapered, like the kind of tools designed to tear or rend, not to manipulate or press. That difference alone writes off any known primate. Even the largest, most powerful great apes have nail-like digits, not talons.
And this thing very clearly has claws.
I mean, do you think that could be a bear?
Or a wolf or a coyote?
Their teammate, Ronnie LeBlanc, who's a Bigfoot researcher, also put forward his suspicions about the hand. Could it be a bear's paw, malformed or worn? A wolf's foot disturbed by disease? A bear's front paw could leave claw impressions, but bears walk on soles, not palm-like surfaces. The knot of a plastic bag in the image offered a scale. It looked like they pulled up photos of bear paws, raccoon footprints, and coyote tracks in their mind. Every standard animal theory crumbled. The hand, measured against the knot scale, was far too large for those species, and the arrangement of the fingers, the depth of the knuckle indentations, didn't align. Bryce asked Ronnie for a deeper perspective. Ronnie had spent decades in the field. His memory wasn't just full of stories. It was packed with the textures of forests, the feel of bark under rough hands, and the smell of wet earth after a rain. A few minutes after sending the image, Ronnie replied steady and measured. He remembered tales, more like rumors, of sightings where the creature's nails were unusually long and dark. But most credible accounts described hands that looked very human, just much larger. Ronnie was skeptical and cautious, as always. No one had ever proven either version, the clawed hands or the oversized human-like ones. Without answers, Bryce felt restless. The photograph had thrown down a challenge. He knew he had to get to the bottom of this. And at the same time, it left Ronnie and Dr. Maria wondering as well. If a creature resembling a human could have developed such curved claws, what purpose might they serve? Digging, climbing, or tearing at tree bark for grubs? Meanwhile, Ronnie and Dr. Maria were already back out in the field, continuing their search. The land in southeastern Kentucky was rough and hard to travel through. Rolling hills dropped into thick, overgrown clearings, where tall grass, tangled brush, and fallen trees made every step more difficult. Above them, the sky was heavy and gray, the clouds pressing low as the daylight slowly faded away. What immediately caught their attention was the grass. Large areas of it had been pressed flat. It didn't look like the work of wind or weather. The stalks weren't bent in one direction, but mashed down unevenly, as if something big and heavy had forced its way across the ground. The impressions dug deep into the soil, clear enough to suggest that whatever left them wasn't just human-sized, it was massive.
Whatever was coming through that area was rather large and had trampled all of the vegetation in that area, leaving a trail that we could actually follow.
Even more unusual was the path itself. It didn't run straight the way a deer trail or animal track usually would. Instead, it curved, twisted, and doubled back in spots, almost as if it were made by something aware of where it was going, something choosing its direction instead of simply following instinct. The ground beneath them was dense with undergrowth, making tracking footprints nearly impossible. But Ronnie had learned that field research demanded adaptation, and the inability to find footprints didn't doom the search. So something clicked in their minds. They should start searching for the kinds of structures that a Bigfoot was likely to build. A nest was one of the possibilities. They were confident about this because they had already found one during their Oregon expedition just the year before. The other thing to look for was a kind of tree structure. These were usually broken trees or branches set up in such a way that it gave the impression someone was trying to make a shelter or home out of them. Most of the time, these formations looked like teepees, or they appeared arranged in ways that didn't seem natural. Evidence like this strongly suggested that something or someone had left their mark in the area.
This could possibly be a new nesting site, and these tree structures are a way of marking it.
Agreed.
Just like during that earlier expedition, they soon noticed a few odd signs that immediately grabbed their attention. High above them, a branch appeared partly broken, the pale inside of the wood still looking fresh and exposed. It wasn't just hanging in any random spot either. It was placed, almost carefully, into a sheltered corner made where the trees and plants overlapped. The way it sat there gave the impression that something had disturbed the area recently, leaving behind a subtle trace of movement and activity. They knew this was exactly the type of thing they needed to watch for today. So, they pressed on further. Along the way, they came across more broken trees, but they were also realistic enough to understand that not every snapped branch was a sign of Bigfoot. Sometimes, trees simply collapse onto one another by natural causes, storms, wind, or age. Because of that, they kept their search steady, not jumping to conclusions too quickly. And then, to their surprise, they stumbled across a tree structure that looked freshly broken. This was different, and immediately, the careful assessment began. They bent down low, crawling under the thick, tangled plants. It felt like a hidden space, almost like a small room in the middle of the forest. It was covered enough to hide something from view, and the way the plants hung overhead might even help keep the ground warmer by trapping moisture during the night. If this was where something had been resting, there should have been clues to prove it. Maybe a few strands of hair stuck to a sharp branch, or dents in the leaves where a body had pressed down for hours. Ronnie sifted through the mess on the ground, moving leaves aside and checking each spot carefully. Maria walked around slowly, taking detailed photos of every angle so they wouldn't miss anything later, but there was nothing to find. No hair caught in the branches, no spots where the ground looked pressed down, no smell except for the strong, wet scent of dirt and plants hanging in the heavy air.
There's not a lot of evidence of an intention to make a structure down here.
Still, the mix of old, worn branches and freshly broken ones made it seem like something had been here from time to time. Maybe whatever made it didn't come back often, or maybe it was just starting to build this spot. They followed the path downhill, where the ground turned softer and harder to walk on. The forest seemed to close in around them. Vines wrapped around the young trees, roots stuck out of the ground like hidden traps, and the mud pulled at their boots with every step. They had to move slowly and carefully. The air felt heavy, thick, and damp. Shadows gathered between the plants, and the wet smell of the forest filled their noses. Even the usual sounds seemed softer, muffled by all the moisture around them. They kept moving deeper. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded louder in the silence. Sometimes they just stopped and stood still, listening for breathing, for movement, for anything that didn't belong. But nothing felt normal. The forest seemed almost staged, like it was waiting for something to happen. Step by step, they went on, every breath slow, their senses stretched tight. Science didn't recognize Bigfoot as anything more than a legend, and to most people, this photograph would just be another oddity in a long line of mysteries. But for those who had spent years investigating, the repeated sightings and certain consistent details demanded attention. They weren't naive, they were careful, but also curious. The hunt wasn't over yet. The path stretched ahead, unseen but deeply felt, twisting onward through the unknown. The photograph had opened a door, and now the team was chasing the scattered pieces through mud, through doubt, and through every dark and shadowed corner of the forest.
The only other possibility is that there were several things moving through the forest.
Right.
And that's why you were hearing it back here, and
True.
I was hearing it up there.
Every snapped twig, every sudden rustle in the underbrush could be a clue, or it could be a warning waiting to unfold. And somewhere in those damp hollows, maybe above flattened grass or past broken branches, the next clue was waiting. Could they find it? Only the next trip, the next careful step would tell. The rain had been threatening all day, and now it hung in the air like a warning. In Ronnie's experience tracking primates, rain usually meant one thing: reduced movement. Many animals, especially the more cautious ones, preferred to shelter in place when the weather turned. Movement became risky, tracks could be washed away, scents dissipated faster, and predators might take advantage of the cover. This applied to Bigfoot sightings as well, at least in the theories many researchers shared. For creatures believed to be both smart and hard to find, weather could be an advantage, something they knew how to use. Many field researchers thought the younger ones were especially good at climbing. While people on the ground kept their eyes down, looking for footprints, bent plants, or other signs, the thing they were chasing could be sitting quietly up in the trees, watching the whole time. It was a creepy thought, something close enough to reach out and touch, yet completely unseen. Gorillas showed a good example of this. Young gorillas often climb high into the treetops to stay safe from animals on the ground, their dark bodies blending into the maze of branches and leaves. If these creatures acted the same way, then the team's search was missing half the picture. They would have to start looking both at the ground and into the tall, shadowy shapes above them. The weather started to change again. Thick clouds sank lower, blocking what little moonlight there had been. The wind grew stronger, shaking the branches and pushing damp air through the valleys. A storm was coming. Even so, both of them kept moving, walking closer together.
That is weird. Is that twisted? Look how this is wrapped around.
Their best tool at night was a red light. Unlike a bright white flashlight, the soft red glow didn't ruin their night vision and was harder to see from far away. In theory, it lets them watch the area without being noticed right away. To someone who wasn't looking for it, or maybe even to a sharp-eyed creature hiding in the bushes, the red light would just look like a faint shadow, barely visible in the dark. Even so, the forest followed its own rules at night. Human eyes, which needed light to see well, had trouble adjusting to real darkness. Even with special gear, they could only see a small part of what they could see in daylight. Every moving shadow and every faint sound seemed louder and more important. Then, everything went quiet. Dr. Maria and Ronnie froze, their bodies stiff, heads tilted to the side. They didn't move at all, and even their breathing slowed without them realizing. Past the soft sound of rain in the distance, they heard it. Movement. It was faint, but deliberate. Something was shifting its weight just outside the glow of the red light. They quickly looked at each other, and without a word, started moving toward the sound. The ground sloped down slightly, leading them into a narrow path between two large stone formations. Their red lights moved slowly across the area, checking every surface. That's when they saw it, small, deliberate shapes carved into the rocks ahead.
Wait, Ronnie. Did you smell that?
These weren't the normal nests they had seen before on their expeditions. Those nests were built through branches, yanked down, and made into a secure resting place. These were different. At first, they looked like rough shelters. Low, rounded piles of stones mixed with fallen branches made little spaces just big enough for someone to curl up inside. And there wasn't only one or two, there were several of them. 5, maybe 6, each hidden in natural dips and cracks in the rock walls. The site was interesting. Nature could sometimes make rock shapes that looked like shelters, but this pattern seemed intentional. The shapes were about the same size and spaced evenly, almost like they had been set up for a small group. The openings faced away from the main wind, which would help keep out rain. It made them more and more curious. They had to find out if they had finally hit their jackpot, and then maybe the mystery of the hand would be solved. So, Ronnie stepped closer to check it out. Inside, the space was dark and shallow, but hidden well from most directions. If someone, or something, wanted a quick place to hide or rest, this would be a smart choice. The rocks around it made it hard to see from a distance, and the overhead cover could block light rain. As they got closer, the air seemed to change. A sharp, musky smell drifted out from deeper in the rocks. At first, it was so faint it was easy to miss, but the closer they stepped, the stronger it became. Dr. Maria quickly realized this wasn't just the smell of wet stone or old leaves. It was animal musk. Strong, thick, hard to ignore. She asked if Ronnie was smelling it as well because she recognized the smell, and she knew it could get ugly, fast.
We seem to have stumbled upon a bear den on the trail, and it has me on high alert. I'm waiting for something to pop up right behind those rocks.
Black bears aren't usually the most aggressive animals, but they can be unpredictable. If they're protecting a den, they'll defend it fiercely. In a place like this, with tight rock shelters, the team could be only a few steps from a mother with cubs, or a big male guarding the spot. The red lights moved faster now, searching the shadows for any sign of fur or movement. Every dark crack seemed deeper than it really was, and every big rock felt like it could be hiding something. The musky smell grew stronger, hanging heavy in the narrow space between the stone walls. At times like this, it was hard to tell who was hunting whom. Hours of careful tracking could be ruined in an instant by one wrong step. The focus had shifted from gathering evidence to just getting out safely. They had been on the trail for hours. This part of the forest was different from the open areas they'd passed earlier. The land was tricky, full of ridges and valleys that funneled anyone moving through into narrow paths. One of those paths stretched ahead, a faint animal trail through the undergrowth, worn smooth from use and running for miles deep into the forest. But those miles weren't empty. This area was home to one of the densest populations of black bears around. You could smell them in the air, see claw marks on trees, overturned logs, and deep paw prints pressed into the soft soil. Moving down this path meant heading straight into bear territory, with poor visibility and no easy way out. They were also exhausted. Fatigue dulled their senses, making it harder to hear faint sounds or notice subtle movement at the edges of their vision. With a storm approaching, visibility would drop even more, and wet, slippery ground would make a fast retreat far more dangerous. Every step had to be measured. After thinking it over carefully, the choice became obvious. They couldn't safely continue the search this way tonight. Moving forward would only increase the risk without any real chance of finding new evidence or making progress. Reluctantly, Dr. Maria and Ronnie began to pull back, retracing their steps away from the shelters and the strong, heavy musk lingering in the air. Every footstep was deliberate, avoiding loose stones and minimizing noise. Their red lights stayed low, scanning the edges of the path, always alert for the sudden, threatening shape of a bear emerging from the shadows or a branch snapping under unseen weight. The forest seemed quieter on the way back, though it was hard to tell whether that was real or just their minds relaxing now that they were putting distance between themselves and the densest bear territory. Even in retreat, there was an awareness that the night still held secrets. As they moved towards safer ground, quiet conversation began again, low, careful voices, sharing impressions of what they had seen.
There are no known primates here. There's something really out there.
Something really out there.
This could be a Bigfoot.
The shelters, whether natural formations or arranged somehow, had a strange, deliberate quality. The odor, unmistakably that of a bear, suggested someone or something was there recently. But questions lingered in everyone's mind. Were the shelters purely the work of animals? Or had something else shaped them before they were used by the bears? Fieldwork often left such questions unanswered. Nature had a way of blurring the lines between the work of animals, the slow influence of weather, and the possibility of something entirely unknown. Each explanation layered over the others, leaving a mix of clues and mysteries. Only careful study and maybe another visit in the future could begin to untangle the truth, step by cautious step. By the time the trail widened enough for easier walking, the team had picked up their pace. They were no longer moving like careful trackers, scanning every sound and shadow. Instead, they walked with a steady, confident stride, aware that the most dangerous ground was now behind them. Each step felt lighter, though their minds stayed alert, still scanning the forest edges for movement or sudden sounds. When they finally reached a spot where they could pause and take stock, the rain began to fall. Fat drops spattered on leaves, quickly turning into a steady curtain that blurred the shapes of the forest around them. The sound of water hitting the ground filled the air, masking smaller noises and adding a sense of separation from what they had just left behind. It was proof that retreat had been the right choice. Trying to track in this weather would have been nearly impossible, and the risk far too great. For the first time in hours, they allowed themselves a moment to breathe, grateful to have made it out safely, at least for now. They hadn't found clear evidence tonight, but they had learned a lot about the terrain, the habits of wildlife, and where the known and unknown might cross paths. The shelters were important to note, as was the idea that these formations could serve different purposes for different creatures over time. For now, the night ended not with the thrill of discovery, but with a quiet sense of caution. The search would continue another night under clearer skies, with fresh energy and a plan that considered all the dangers ahead. As they gathered their gear and looked back at the dark forest, each of them felt the pull of curiosity. What else might be hiding just out of sight? The forest hadn't given up its secrets easily, and chances were, it rarely did. What would they find next time, and would they be ready?